I still remember it. There was an old man there coming every day to supply our school with milk. And probably he had heard of me, and one day he asked me, where are you coming from, Persia? I said, Persia. Oh, he said, oh, I know, it's in America.
When I was in America in 1964, almost nobody knew where Iran was. And they would ask me questions like, you know, how did you get here? And I would say, I came with plane, of course. And they look as if they don't believe it. They couldn't believe, you know, we had planes. So after a while, I started saying, you know, I came with flying carpet. I came on a flying carpet. And they look as if they really believed it.
Iran, or Persia, as it was known for most of its history, is at the crossroads of the Middle East and Asia. In the so-called free world, the image of Iran is of a land where oppression rules. It's often stated or implied that Iran is a police state. If it was, this series of film reports could not have been made. Iran is a paradox. It's an anti-communist state with a leader who is putting into practice the policies which some revolutionaries only shout about.
Iran! Iran!
Persia was the first world power. More than 2,500 years ago, this city of Persepolis, now in splendid ruin, was the center of an empire which stretched from Greece to India. According to history, it's likely the Persians would have expanded still further and become the first supreme power in southeastern Europe if the Greeks of the mainland had not stopped them. It took the Persians 65 years to build Persepolis with the help of the most skilled craftsmen and materials from every corner of their vast empire. The conquering Greeks, led by Alexander, destroyed the city in a few days.
He burned it deliberately because he saw in this the essence of the empire. He saw in Persepolis the might and culture and everything that the Persians had seen in their own empire in one crucible, and he wanted to tell them that because it is Persepolis and your empire, then Persepolis is finished and your empire is also finished. And in fact, this is what happened. Once Persepolis was burned, then the Persian empire collapsed.
Persepolis was destroyed in 330 BC. From that time till recently, and apart from brief periods of cultural and artistic achievement, the Persians were finished. From the late 17th century onwards, Iran's peasants were amongst the poorest and most backward in the world. The peasants had no human or legal rights of any kind. They were exploited without mercy, from within by the landlords and Iran's ruling elite, and from without by foreign powers, mostly Russia and Britain. In the province of Baluchistan, on modern Iran's border with Pakistan, a tribesman, Mahdad Notani, recalls the life of 25 years ago.
25 years ago, if a vehicle passed through this area, the people in the vehicle would have been done for to begin with. Then 100 or so local people would have been killed as well. Why? Because in those days the roads were unsafe. There were no schools. There were no gendarmerie posts. There were none of these wells or other developments. The people spent most of their lives fighting. There is a place near here, 18 miles away, called the cemetery. There are still the graves there of almost 70 Englishmen who were killed as they passed. Our people are buried there too, in 4s and 6s. The cause of the killing in the cemetery I told you about was our own territory, our land and water. If a foreigner tried to take away a single stone from our territory, we were ready to lose 200 lives to defend it. That was why the killing at the cemetery happened. If there was water, we would last without bread for 30 days. We would eat raw meat, camel meat, mutton, beef, even with no salt or fire. We would roast it in the sun. If we put a piece of meat on the rock this morning, it would be cooked by now. We could fight an enemy for 30 days on that.
Did many of his friends used to die because they were hungry, or the children, did they die?
خیلی از بچه‌ها می‌مردن، خود مردا اینا می‌مردن برای که نمی‌تونستن.
Yes, yes. In those days there were no doctors or hygiene care for children. No doctor came this way. The people just died.
دکتر اینجا گذر نمی‌کرد، نپله می‌شد.
Our life before, about 10 years ago, we could hardly live at all. The Baluchis and the gendarmes were the worst of all. If we saw a soldier, we used to run away and hide. But for the last 10 years or so, so far as I can remember, as a result of the will of God and the grace of His Majesty, we have lived in much more comfort. Even if we have nothing else, we have security.
Did they have enough to eat 10 and 15 years ago? And what did they eat?
Food? In those days we ate dates. They were brought from Jiroft. Every 3 or 4 days we had flour made of millet or barley. We ate them with animal grasses.
Did some of their people used to die because they didn't have enough food in those bad old days?
Yes. Girls and boys of 2 or 3 were fed on those grasses. One saw water coming out of their mouths, and they died.
There can be few occasions in all of history when the inheritors of an ancient civilization were so thoroughly humiliated by wave after wave of invading forces. Each occupying power left its mark, a scar. But one thing the Persians never surrendered was their pride in what had been achieved in times past. The man who was to begin the process of renewal was born here in 1878, the village of Elasht in the mountains which slope down to Iran's border with Russia. At the time of his birth here, the Russians and the British, though rivals, were well on their way to establishing complete control of Iran's economy and politics. The man from this village who was to challenge the big powers was illiterate. His name was Reza Khan. Reza Khan refused to tolerate fools and liars. When in later years high officials sought to influence him by flattery, he would explode with anger. "Don't be a bloody fool," he would say. "I'm the son of a peasant." The spark which set ablaze the smouldering fire of Iranian nationalism was Britain's decision in 1919 to convert Iran into a vassal state. Reza Khan led Iran's nationalists in a successful coup against the government of Ahmed Shah, the last of the Qajar kings. They'd had enough of Ahmed Shah's continuing capitulation to foreigners. In 1926, Reza Khan was proclaimed Shah and became the first king of the Pahlavi dynasty. But it was an event which nearly didn't happen. Reza Khan wanted Iran to become a republic with himself as president. He was eventually persuaded that Iran's traditions demanded a restoration of the monarchy. Reza Shah's strong brand of nationalism was not merely the product of his mistrust of foreigners. His driving force was his faith in the capacity of his people to make Iran a great nation again. His first showdown with the bullying big powers came in 1931. Even then, the subject of confrontation was oil. For hundreds of years, some Iranian peasants had been using the stuff to make fuel cakes for their fires. In 1901, the Qajar king awarded to an Australian prospector the exclusive exploration and exploitation rights throughout Iran for a period of 60 years. This key to Iran's future was virtually given away. By the time of the foreigners' first discovery of oil in commercial quantities in 1908, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company had been formed in London to take over the original concession. When the company refused to improve the terms of the concession, Reza Shah cancelled the contract. The dispute went to the League of Nations, and Reza Shah won. But his victory led to increasing bitterness between Britain and Iran, which eventually cost Reza Shah his throne. The creation of a communications network of roads and railways opened the way to development, progress and change. Under Reza Shah, the country was opened up. Law and order was restored. Nationalism was wielded into a single territorial force. The foundation stones for nation building were laid. Iran was on the move again. When the Second World War began, Reza Shah declared his country neutral. At dawn on the 25th of August 1941, the Allies invaded. The Russians from the north, British and Indian forces from the west and the south. When the invasion plan was being discussed, Lord Wavell, the Viceroy of India, wrote to Churchill,
"It is essential that we should join hands with Russia through Iran. If the present government of Iran is not willing to facilitate this, it must be made to give way to one that will."
The war was going badly for the Allies. Hitler's forces had inflicted defeat on the Russians along a 1,000-mile front. So Iran became what Allied command called the bridge to victory, because it was the safest route for supplies to Russia. Why the Allies resorted to invasion is still much debated. Reza Shah's refusal to be dictated to by the big powers was a major factor. But the records of both sides suggest that invasion wouldn't have been necessary if the Allies had been honest with Reza Shah and had taken him into their confidence. The British in particular were not prepared to do that. They were too prejudiced against the man who, before the war started, had signalled his intention to play a leading role in ushering in the twilight of the British Empire. Three weeks after the invasion, broken and humiliated, Reza Shah abdicated. Crown Prince Mohammed Reza, the present Shah, took over. The old man was exiled. He died in South Africa in 1944. The loss felt by most Iranians at the moment of abdication was even more profound when Reza Shah's body was eventually returned to Iran for a state funeral. One said, "I felt as if the ground on which I stood had been taken from under me. The feeling of security given by knowing that Reza Shah was in his palace, looking after his nation, suddenly disappeared." Reza Shah's defeat and humiliation was the moment when many Iranians lost faith in the belief, inspired into them by their king, that they could once more be the masters of their own future. After the long journey home from South Africa, Reza Shah's body was laid to rest in Tehran.
What is your interpretation of the events which ended with your father's abdication? Do you think, perhaps with hindsight, that he might have been a bit stubborn and refused to compromise and to some extent brought the trouble on himself? Or do you think the Allies were determined to force him to go?
No, they were determined, no doubt. I was living every minute of those days. And I remember we sending messages to the Western countries that what you want. We know that you are cooking up something. A reply never came. They wanted to get rid of somebody who was independent and who have eventually asked some price for the Allies to take advantage of all our lines of communication, our roads, our railroads. Do you know that during the war, 11 million tons of goods were transported through this country from the Western world to the Soviet Union? So they didn't want him to be around.
What was it, do you think, that they objected to, that he was beginning to make Iran independent, beginning to strike out for independence?
Sure. He was not one of those people who would have accepted a small messenger coming and transmitting messages that he had to obey or carry out. Not that I did. I also resisted in my way after I assumed
but in fact,
responsibilities.
When you took over, I think the Allies for a few days even refused to recognize your succession.
Yes, they did so. They knew little of me as a crown prince. I was rather outspoken in those days. And they thought, well, it will be the same story. Then, in order not to have the same burdens, they did their best, almost during the whole of the occupation of this country, to diminish the powers and the role of the sovereign in this country.
Your basic problem, I think, when you took over, and you were not quite 21 in those circumstances, was that there was almost nobody around you you could trust. Even Iranian politicians were playing each other off against and with the foreign powers. That was a big problem, wasn't it?
It was. it was. And this is why I say almost a miracle saved us at the end of the war, like a miracle saved us at the end of the First World War. This is why I'm so determinedly set on having some deep-rooted organization which will be the expression of the real people, not just the expression of a few rotten politicians.
From the moment the Crown Prince became Shah at the age of 21, he was engaged in a long and bitter struggle with corrupt and self-seeking politicians from the country's ruling elite. But the young Shah's first priority was to develop a new foreign policy. He was determined to be more flexible and pragmatic than his father, a strength which his enemies misinterpreted as a weakness. By the time of the Tehran Conference in November 1943, the young Shah had forged a working relationship with Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin. The British and the Russians had earlier promised to withdraw their forces from Iran within 6 months of the war's end. But Stalin continued the occupation and promoted a rebellion in the north. Eventually, the Shah refused to be intimidated by Stalin and sent his troops north to put down the rebellion. And with the help of international pressures, the Shah forced the Russians out. After this success for the Shah's new foreign policy, Iran's parliament met in a new mood of confidence. But the removal of the direct Russian threat only intensified Iranian bitterness towards Britain. In the years of street demonstrations, mob violence and assassinations which followed, the British, like the Russians, worked behind the scenes to exploit every dissident element for their own ends. The Communist Party, the Tudor, took the frontline role in demonstrations against the Shah. For a time, British oil interests actively encouraged the Communists. The violence of these years included the first attempt on the Shah's life. Apart from the Communists, the Shah's enemies included ultra-conservative forces, amongst them religious fanatics and feudal landlords, who were beginning to take fright at what the Shah might do to improve the lot of the peasants.
Would you recall for us the events of the 4th of February 1949, which was in fact the first attempt to assassinate you at Tehran University?
As usual, every year I was going to distribute the diplomas and the first prizes to the students of Tehran University at the Faculty of Law. And all of a sudden, I hear shots and my face is projected to one side when I realized that I was being shot at. And he had shot 3 bullets through my hat, 1 through my cheek, but the bullet came out just through the nose without hurting anything, any nerves, any teeth. 1 was destined for the heart, but at this fraction of, or even less than a fraction of a second, I was just making a gesture, a turn of the body. So I got it in my left elbow on the back. The man was killed because he was trying to escape. But then we found out that he was frequenting a man who had connections with the rightist fanatic clergymen, but he had communistic pamphlets and literature in his house, and his girlfriend was the daughter of the gardener of the British Embassy. I can't say for sure what he was, but anyway, this is what we found out.
For the next 4 years, the Shah became a prisoner of events. The man who controlled those events was Iran's Prime Minister of the period, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh became the popular hero of Iran because he told the people what they most wanted to hear. the arrogant foreigners could be humbled and made to pay much more for Iran's oil. Abadan became one of the best-known datelines as the oil crisis developed. When Britain refused to pay a penny more for oil, Iran nationalized. The British replied with an economic and diplomatic offensive aimed at the economic strangulation of Iran. When Mossadegh couldn't deliver what he'd promised, he denounced the need for a settlement and plunged Iran further along the road to bankruptcy. The explosive anti-British mood continued to support Mossadegh's policy of no compromise, which the Shah opposed. But when Mossadegh showed his intention to eliminate the Pahlavi dynasty, he overplayed his hand. His broad-based support began to evaporate. At the final showdown in August 1953, his support was coming mainly from the communists. He had become their prisoner.
Obviously, the communists were 100% behind him because they knew that they could topple him in no time. In matter of fact, when he was thrown out by the revolution of the people, and when we occupied the two-day headquarters and from some of the officers belonging to the party, we found out that they planned to overthrow him 2 weeks after my departure.
So if he had beaten you,
he would have been overthrown 2 weeks later, not more.
And in that case, Iran would have been in danger of becoming a communist state?
Another republic, yes.
Under Mossadegh, the number of communist officers in Iran's armed forces rose from 100 to 600 in less than a year, and a soldier of the Imperial Guard was involved in a later attempt on the Shah's life.
You finally gave a decree for Mossadegh's arrest, and he reacted by proclaiming the coup. But you left the country for Baghdad, where you were very nearly arrested, I think, by your own ambassador. Did you think it a gamble at the time? Did you think you might not be coming back?
Well, you think of everything, obviously. But my going was prepared. It was planned. That if my firman or my orders were not obeyed and carried out immediately, next move would be my departure.
According to most Western accounts of the final struggle between you and Mossadegh, the CIA played a big role in restoring you to power. Precisely what role did the CIA play in that?
Well, the CIA, like your people, like all the Western countries of the world, they were just trembling at seeing the rule of Mossadegh continuing. Some of the people involved from the CIA have already spoken, and they might elucidate this even more. CIA spent not more than $70,000 in this country during those days. If you can stage a coup with $70,000, then you can rule the whole world with just a couple of millions.
So you're saying they exaggerate, and Western accounts exaggerate?
Well, to that extent, you can draw your own conclusions. What can you do with $70,000?
Whatever the precise truth about the Shah's return to Iran in triumph after Mossadegh's defeat, one thing is for sure. Those who rose up in support of the monarch wouldn't have charged Mossadegh's machine guns with their bare hands for a fistful of dollars. The Shah had on occasions to appear as a nationalist prepared to compromise because he was determined to avoid his father's mistake of pushing the big powers too far, too fast. In December 1959, the Shah married Farah Diba. This was the Shah's third marriage. Neither of the others, first to Fawzia and then Soraya, had produced a son and heir. But by now the Shah was looking for more than a wife who could bear him a son. What he most needed was a queen who would share with him the burdens of nation building. When her father, a soldier who studied law, died, Farah and her mother had to struggle to live. To marry the Shah, Farah Diba gave up a promising career in architecture. But in the years to follow, she would become, with the Shah's full support, an architect of radical social change in Iran.
When the king asked you to marry him, what were your thoughts?
Well, you know, I had always loved the king as the king to my country. Without question, he was my king, and I loved him. And I admired him, and I respected him. And of course, when he asked me to marry him, you know, it's difficult to change suddenly from the love of a citizen to his king, from between a man and a woman. I must say frankly that I felt, first of all, very proud, and because I admired him so much. And also, you know, when you're young and you're 19, 20 years of age, you think that when now I will become a queen and I could do so many things for my country. And that was also in my mind. It was not only my private life, but also that what I could be able to do.
A year after the marriage, Crown Prince Reza was born. With the continuation of the dynasty now assured, barring accidents, the Shah had an added incentive for pushing ahead with his plans for reform.
In January 1962, you persuaded the cabinet to accept the land reform bill, but Parliament refused consistently to pass it. Why was that?
Well, Parliament were mostly belonging to the old establishment, although they were mostly doctors and mostly had a degree from very well-known universities. But still, by heart and the spirit was belonging to the established society.
What was called the 1,000 families, I think.
1,000, some people said 200, some people said more, but I'm not just going to say families. To the old established order, I would put it this way.
When they continued to resist your demand for change, did you think that you were again taking a risk? It's a pretty big risk, I would have thought.
Less in those days. First of all, I had more experience. Secondly, I had told people, and anyway, I had convinced myself that no country had more than a certain number of years in front of it before it could either reach an acceptable level of standard of living and progressive rules, or that country will disappear. That was very clear for me. And events are showing that probably I was right. You can't remain in this world full of intrigues and other things, a backward, miserable country, and still be independent. Independence with us is so important that in order to have it, to keep it, to consolidate it, we do anything. Fortunately, in our case, it was making reforms.
The Shah's first step towards land reform came in 1951 when he ordered the Crown lands to be redistributed by sale at concessionary prices to peasant farm workers. The Shah personally distributed thousands of title deeds. The new land-owning peasants were given 25 years to pay for the land. The funds so received were ploughed back into providing supporting services for the farmers. The Shah's policy of redistributing the Crown lands was meant to be an example to the old establishment, which owned more than 50% of the land and was therefore the most influential power in the country. The Shah's battle with the feudal landowners and their allies of the extreme right and left was long and bloody and included another attempt on his life. His personal war with the old establishment began in May of 1962 when Parliament rejected his proposals for nationwide land reform. At the time, Parliament was controlled by the landowners and an assortment of corrupt politicians. The Shah went over the heads of the politicians and appealed directly to the people for support for his reform program. At a special congress in Tehran, attended by 4,000 peasant delegates from all over the country, he made this commitment. I cannot remain a neutral onlooker in the struggle against the forces of evil, but have taken up the banner myself. So that no power can reinstate the regime of slavery in the villages and plunder the nation's wealth for the benefit of a minority, I have decided to refer these reforms to a referendum. The referendum which followed overwhelmingly endorsed the Shah's plans. After nearly a quarter of a century of struggle, he had found his power base. It was with the peasants and the common folk from whom he was descended. But to this day, the war against poverty and injustice which the Shah launched at the Peasant Congress has not been finally won. The progress Iran has made under the leadership of the Shah and Queen Farah is impressive and far-reaching. But because the country was so poor, much still needs to be done. Most ominous of all, some of the old feudal mentality remains in Iran. There are still those, including some in very high places, who dream of a return to the old days of power and privilege for the minority at the expense of those still poor. When the Shah launched his ambitious program of land reform, he said, "What we have started is not a reform limited to land, but something that will change Iranian society." In the second and third of these film reports, I will be investigating the reality of change and the consequences of it. What happens when a nation ceases to be merely the object of the policies of others and becomes a developing country whose decisions and actions will play an increasing part in shaping the destiny of all nations.